Thank you.
Well, I'll kick it off and pass the buck. How's that? So, of course, you're interested in learning what you can to help you in giving tours. And in a way, this first section is the best way to sort of create a basis for a tour, is the way I was thinking about it. The title, Dogs, Faithful and True, you get the gist of it pretty well from that first panel on the wall there. But the three broad themes of the show are expressed by the first three elements. And maybe, depending on the piece, we'll have Scott start with the idea of workers as an ongoing theme in Cal.
Yeah, so as we were looking at incorporating objects and art and all these different things, that those were the three themes that really stuck out for us. And I think, with this sled here, it really encapsulates the long history that Native peoples have had with dogs. As it says sort of in the intro, that dogs have been alongside their humans every step of the way in their experiences in the West and with Native peoples. And so sleds have been around for hundreds of, perhaps thousands of years too. And the dogs have enabled peoples of the Arctic and subarctic areas to really travel across vast distances. And that some of the technology involved in this is and the engineering in it is very, older technology, but also adapting to new materials and those sorts of things. So this dates from the 1950s, but it's very much in line with very much older forms
And newer forms.
And newer forms, yes. And that's something that is spanned across from Native peoples into all the peoples that have come into the West and the northern parts of North America. That you have the Iditarod as sort of that iconic race that's really something that comes from Native people's relationships with dogs.
Just one point of perspective real quick that I didn't think of making until you were saying that, Scott. Just as Native people were in all of these regions for many thousands of years before Europeans came to North America, whether it's the Spanish, the Russians, the Americans, we see archaeological and other evidence, and then there are certain oral traditions that tell us that domesticated dogs were with Native people for at least, 12 to 14,000 years? Who knows? And that when the newcomers came, they brought dogs with them as well. But they were new to this area as well. There were different breeds, etc. So that's part of what we'll learn.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that when we get over this section.
And one thing I'll add about the show in general is it really talks about how important dogs are to us and really gives a very sentimental kind of expression about dogs. The care in which they're depicted, the things that have to do with the dogs, the blankets, the sleds, the shawl, the images, they are all taken with a very benevolent eye. So people really love their dogs, and I think that is an important theme that comes through in the exhibition. This particular piece is by Wendy Redstar. You may recognize it from the Idledore Contemporary Art Fellowship. It is one of 5 shawls. She did 5 shawls based on her reservation. She was away from home and very homesick, and she had a lot of photographs from the reservation, and they were thematic in that it was about res housing, res hoops, res cars, res dogs. And so you may or may not know that reservation dogs often live in a very kind of communal way. They don't necessarily belong to one family or another. They belong to the community and roam around in that way. James, do you want to say anything about the lead painting? Because it's a pretty awesome, this is a pretty incredible piece. And one thing I want to say before James goes on is this is an exhibit that you can really help people understand how to look at a work of art. These paintings are very dynamic. The photographs are very dynamic. There's a lot of action because dogs are moving a lot. So it is a really good way to get into the basic fundamentals of looking at a work of art.
And that's fun to explore. I know you'll talk about the Krauser photographs later, but the idea of motion and activity in that compared with this is a lot of fun.
Incredible. I mean, it's an incredible example.
And this is Waymar Lee, and this is an oil painting on canvas. It's glazed, so you can get up pretty close and get a good sense of how he's used color. But composition, color, everything about this, it's a masterful storytelling painting. Lee painted this about 1913 to 1915. It was based on a hunt in the Cody, Wyoming area in 1912. He was with a small party. The Frost Richards Ranch did guided hunts and dude ranch experiences for people. But they were with a party from the Denver Natural History Museum. Their purpose was to collect a grizzly bear specimen for that museum. And during the course of that, they found this bear. Lee convinced them to hold it at bay so he could take photographs and sketches, which they did. One of the things we know, because many of his sketches exist, is we know that these are specific dogs. I left some sheets with Jennifer, but we know this is Cody, named after the city, I guess. We have some of the other names and whatnot, but they're specific animals, and they're animals that were bred for hunting bears specifically. The Airedales are kind of a fun addition to the troop there, but this is a storytelling painting. We talk about truth in paintings and real stories, but this is a contrived story. So this really happened. The bear was there, the dogs surrounded it. The bear did not attack the man, however. The dogs knocked him over. And it created an idea in the artist's mind to express this scenario. And so this sort of symbolizes for us the idea of the dog as hero. You're going to see a lot more information about the idea of dogs as heroes from many points of view. But this is very much in the tradition of both European, especially British, and American sporting art. The dog is a major part of sporting art, and we have some other examples, Western examples in the show. But this is a terrific painting in terms of composition, color, everything about it. I don't know if you would want to say.
I do want to say a couple things. First of all, you'll notice that all these tails are docked. And that's because they believed, for one thing, that would keep the dogs from getting rabies. So, and there were some other reasons too, health reasons, that they believed that were completely not true. The other thing is, the thing that I think is really exciting about this painting is, number one, the drawing is beautiful. So the perspective on this dog and the proportions, given that it is looking away from us, is incredibly perfect. So that idea of perspective is really very clear to us. The use of atmospheric perspective, just making things look lighter and softer as they go away, is also very nice, along with this very sun-washed color that he has. But the thing I think is so exciting is this composition. You are going right up to that bear. You are coming right back into that bear. You are going down to that bear and into that man. And that man's foot is right next to that claw. So compositionally, this is a really exciting painting. And I think that you can help kids see composition with a painting like this and then find it in other pieces in the exhibition.
What's the name of the painting?
This is called Grizzly at Bay. And actually, not to belabor too much, but the artist was not fully satisfied with this painting. It was acquired at the time by the Frost family at the ranch, and the artist borrowed it back within a year or two and created another version. And so if you simply Google Wyoming bear hunt and go to images, you'll find the other painting. And he created a very different atmosphere. It's a wooded, darker atmosphere. Composition's basically the same. But just for your own interest, take a look at that. It's kind of intriguing how they're both masterful paintings, but the artist wanted to delve deeper in another version.
What's the artist's name again?
William R. Lee, L-E-I-E-H.
incredible painter. I think it's worth mentioning that the dog and handler team over there in the historic photograph was the inspiration for Jack London's Call of the Wild.
Can you give us the names of the dogs? You said that all the dogs are named? Because
They are. The
that'd
only
be fun
name
to tell
that I can share right now is the name Cody for the brown
Yeah,
dog.
but the other ones would be nice to have in the property.
Well, you can't use them because they're not nice names. We would all be embarrassed if you did.
That's right.
Sorry.
Okay, so we have a couple other panels here talking about indigenous words for dogs. So I thought it was important to really show the diversity of native languages, the diversities of native peoples, is also reflected in the diversity of native breeds of dogs. So prior to European contact, there were I don't know how many different breeds of dogs that were already here, and they were bred for different reasons, for to serve different roles within native communities. And so, native people, each community have their own perspectives and their own ideas about the purpose of dogs. And so one of those, we have a couple images over here, through European contact, that dogs do what dogs like to do, and that is get along with other dogs, and so I think part of it is that, there was a lot of interbreeding between different dog varieties that came. And so some of those, survived into the 19th and some into the early 20th century. There's a couple that are still around, but if you do kind of like a Google search, there'll be breeders that sell these Indian dogs, and those aren't, there isn't one single Indian dog. There were lots of different types of dogs. So this kind of gives you an idea of the diversity of those dog breeds. And James, if you want to talk about there's two Audubon prints here of two different types of breeds.
These are new acquisitions, by the way, we purchased with funds from the gun collection of Western Art, a gift that was given us several years ago. The first is from the Mammals of North America series by John James and John Woodhouse Audubon. It's called the Hare Dog. And that's a reference to
The hare people.
the hare, and
They're Athabascan speaking
Yeah.
people up in Canada.
okay. And both that and the Eskimo dog were drawn initially by John James Audubon, the father, from specimens at the London Zoo. But there are really interesting accounts of the dogs that we've quoted in the labels, these dogs being observed in the early 1800s in mostly Canada.
You might notice that there's teepees in the background, but actually I have found some historic images of Eskimo dwellings that are teepee-like, so it could be in reference to that, but they do kind of look stereotypically like teepees. So that might just be something to keep in mind.
And I think that it's worth noting that the hare dog looks somewhat like a cat and actually could climb trees.
Oh, my God.
There, people, the author who did the quote that we have here, they speculated in the 1800s that the Eskimo dog was descended from wolves, and that there was speculation that the hare dog may have been descended from wolves or coyotes, but there was speculation it might have been descended from the fox. There doesn't seem to be any basis for that, but that was the extent of knowledge at the time.
And then we have an image here from a Paul Kane painting of the Coast Salish woolly dog. And that was a dog bred specifically for its fur. So essentially produced a wool just like sheep, and then that was twined together with the wool from the mountain sheep, and then later on with domestic sheep and other natural materials, and then woven to these exquisite blankets, which tried to get one for this exhibit, but the University of British Columbia Anthropology Museum is doing an exhibit on Coast Salish weaving right now too. So all of those, there's only about maybe 5 known examples that incorporate the Coast Salish woolly dog, and they either can't travel or are going there. So anyway, that's what we have as an example.
And there is going to be a woman in the store that takes dog hair and spins it into yarn and uses it to weave, so stay tuned.
Oh, well, I just get in front of you. Love to see. Oh.
So we thought it'd be important to just give a little kind of background about dogs and, where they come from. So, as James mentioned, that for Native people, there's a lot of oral histories that talk about dogs, and, that there's this, long history of humans, perhaps up to 150,000 years ago was when we created that relationship with the ancestors of dogs, wolves. And so all dogs are considered a subspecies of the gray wolf. So Canis, wait a minute, I got it over here. Canis lupus. So dogs are Canis lupus familiaris. And so those are their most closest living relatives. They are related to the coyotes, but the ancestors of the wolf and the coyote split off much longer ago. But all three of them can interbreed with one another. So you do have some of these kind of interbreeding going on all over the place now.
So lost in time, coyotes and wolves were.
They have a shared ancestor.
Their DNA would be similar if you go back far.
Yeah, they're both part of the Canis genus, but coyotes are Canis latrans. And some of the times when you're out walking around, going for a hike or something, you might see a coyote track, but if it's a little dog, it could be a coyote track. But wolves definitely, it's kind of hard to tell some of the difference between this. So we have just kind of some, kind of interactive here where you can kind of touch and feel about that. And then some different things to kind of show the differences between that. But, since that long relationship that humans have had with dogs, all these different breeds have come about, and people have created these breeds to serve specific roles into their communities. And so they've taken on different characteristics, physical characteristics, different personalities, and all those sorts of things to serve these different roles.
How does the fox tie into this?
They're very distantly related. They're Vulpes, which is their genus, so they're not even part of the same genus.
I do, while we're here, want to talk a little bit about Michael Krauser. You'll see 2 photographs here, 2 across the room, and 4 photographs in the back. These 4 that are up here are from a series that he did in Burns, Colorado on a ranch. And the one thing about his photographs that is really incredible is the range of tones that he has. So when you get up to these images of dogs, you can really see each one of these little furs that make up that kind of brindle color of the Australian Shepherd, or of the Australian cattle dog. And again, very dynamic. Even with this dog sitting here, it is in a very C-like shape, very dynamic angle behind him. And of course, these 2 lovely jumping dogs are very action-packed as well. This image is very endearing for a lot of people. And I think that this is a lovely little whimsical piece by a contemporary artist, but it does give you the real gesture of a border collie in the way that they stalk as they herd. And there's a lot of herding images and ranch dog images in this particular area. I think it's worth noting that not all herding dogs actually herd. Some of them guard the herd, like the Old English Sheepdog or a Great White Pyrenees. And then you have dogs like, that lovely little Australian Shepherd's area in the lower right-hand corner. I wonder whose dog that might be. Then dogs like Doc actually herd up the sheep and move them around. The other thing that I think is interesting that's portrayed in this painting here by Remington, and I hope you'll talk about it, James, is that conflict between cattle and sheep ranchers.
The conflict, but not necessarily conflict with dogs.
Right.
As Jennifer can tell you, there are also herd dogs for cattle. But this is one of those standard tropes in the Western story, the story of the conflict between sheep, which eat the grass down below the roots of it almost, and the competition that they provided for water and feed against cattle. So we reference open range, but it's not just an open range story, but it is a story common in literature of the West. In this case, Frederick Remington painting actually he did some interesting paintings of sheep, and he always included dogs in many of his, he often included dogs in many of his paintings, but this storytelling about the herd dog, he's as much a defender of the flock as the sheep herder is. So it's a story about conflict. I don't know what else to say about it.
And I do think that, you can point out when you're going through here, if you talk about composition at all, beautiful atmospheric perspective in both of these paintings. Quite lovely.
There's a lengthy statement here about dogs as workers. There are many other kinds of tasks that dogs are put to. And different kinds of dogs came to the West through the migration of different kinds of people. So Basque sheep herders are a fun example of that. I'll leave it to Jennifer to comment about the history of the Australian Shepherd, which isn't Australian at all, apparently.
Not at all.
So, but different kinds of work, and all you have to do is look at examples of herding. Here's an image of a dog running a dog-powered butter churn. A dog pulling a child's wagon. There are all kinds of work, and dogs have been put to it on a lot of different ways.
You can have any music playing through here or any dog barking or anything like that?
No sound.
Okay.
And everyone in the museum will be grateful for that. Do we want to point out the Studebaker wagon? Do you want to talk about that, Jay?
Does everybody know where Studebaker was made? Indiana. Actually, Studebaker farm wagons were a mainstay of any kind of farming in the West. There are many examples of Studebaker wagons being used by kids all over the country, but the example in the photograph, unfortunately, is not a Studebaker. It's a fancier version with a painted scene on the side, but we couldn't find a better example of a dog pulling one. We have photographs of these Studebaker wagons being pulled by dogs, turkeys, goats. Dogs weren't the only creatures in harness, but this is actually on loan from a member of our staff whose grandfather purchased it in 1917.
And Studebaker is buried in Huntsville, Alabama.
Yeah.
Was that a play?
Yes, it is a toy. But pretty functional.
The other day, and one of the little hummingbirds on that picture. Yeah.
I'll chime in.
We have some really great prints from Harrison Begay, who's a really fantastic Navajo artist who a lot of his work is done in the flat style. But this really illustrates the the importance of dogs for Navajo people and that relationship between them and sheep. So sheep came very early on to the Navajo, and then they incorporated dogs as to help with that as well. And so you get to see it kind of the importance of dogs within kind of daily life for Navajo people, especially a lot of endearing ones with children. And you'll see that as another theme, kind of dogs and children. And I think we all can we all kind of are attracted to that. We had dogs as children too. And so these are some of my favorite objects that we got for this exhibit. And these are dog blankets. And so the image behind you kind of gives you an idea of what this would look like. So throughout kind of the subarctic, northern plains area, as we mentioned, the sled is very, very important, but there's these other kind of sleds called carrioles. You can kind of see in the bottom right there. And this is from Peter Rindisbacher of Métis people bringing in, I think he was a French person, into town in the 1820s. And you get this real sense of kind of the movement and the color, but then also thinking about the sound. And so they're, probably coming into the trading post, dressed in their finest, and the dogs are dressed in their finest. And they have the sleigh bells on them, and the dogs barking, and you kind of just get an idea of just kind of the excitement that this would create as these dogs pulled in this sled. And so the two over here are from the Mackenzie River area in northwestern Canada, probably from the Gwich'in people. And then this one over here is a Cree example. And so just exquisitely beaded, just think of the care that was taken to put into these, and really, expresses that care that they had about their dogs. Yeah. Yeah, it's more of a decoration, and then kind of you can see they have bells on them too. And so that, that's kind of, creates that sound.
Can you repeat the name of the sled?
Carriole?
It's right here.
Yeah, it's on there. And then there's a couple other drawings over there by where James is standing. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about those.
These are by Paul Kane, who was an Irish Canadian. They were done in 1848. And he talks, we had direct quotes from Paul Kane about what he was seeing when he drew these. So these are dogs being prepared for a wedding party. You see the similar blankets with the bells and the feathered decorations. He talks about the sound of the embellishments there, but light has to be a little low because these are the original watercolors. So.
But those are beautiful, delicate drawings. Beautiful. Or paintings. Or both.
This is the same artist who did the photo blow-up of the Weaver that Scott pointed out at the beginning with the curly dog.
And then the tapestry over here is a more recent, let's see, it's from 1981. And I think this has been on exhibit maybe a couple times up in the Arctic Subarctic Gallery. But it really gives you, it's like dogs very much have a role as workers within Inuit and Native communities of the North, but they're also part of the community. They're companions, and that's the other thing that these dogs have certain roles they're specifically bred for, but they also serve lots of different other roles, and so they're just kind of part of everyday life.
And then did everybody get a look at what our photo op So, just encourage people to stand behind the sled. They're not supposed to sit on the sled. And there's gonna be a little image of dogs as if they're running. So, FYI.
Hashtag outdoor dogs, don't let people forget that.
And then Doreen, do you want to talk about the trail walk?
Everybody come in and gather around the track walk. We have this on see the natural history. And before the Spanish came and introduced the horse to people on the plains, they would use their dogs to help haul little burdens and maybe a sick person or a little kid. And I think that Steve did a great job with the little dog figures to help mount it. But I had fun picking out some of the murals for the exhibit, such as this one. It's a blood woman from Canada, and the one in the other room was Seminoles.
You can tell them about the pack dog.
Togo. We have a nice interactive here for kids to come along. We named him Togo. Like little fruity stuff, and then there's toys there.
I was wondering what's in the dog's first, what should be in the dog's first aid kit? There isn't anything.
There's nothing, because we didn't want Band-Aids.
But I'm sitting here scratching my head wondering,
Thanks for tweezers in case they get stuff like thorn or porcupine.
I have a dog emergency kit in my car, and it has bandages and ointment and
Yeah, it's a lot of the
rinses.
things that you find in just a normal first aid kit. We were just a little too nervous to include those kinds of things in the gallery.
I can see why this one is empty.
James, do you want to talk about?
Well, a couple things I forgot. This is another painting by William R. Lee. You've seen it in the Dunn Gallery. It's on loan from the Adams family. But this is a painting that Lee did 1948, a whole generation after the Grizzly at Bay painting you saw in the front. It's part of the same story. This is a generation later. Lee, now in his 80s, is still painting about this experience. It's sort of the aftermath, if you will. And I'm pretty sure they're the same dogs, at least three of them. But you can see his palette has brightened a little bit as he's gotten older. And this is, as I say, just a continuation of that story. We do have grizzly bear fur here. And the continuation of this sporting art you see evident in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, etc. This is a painting by Bob Kuhn. It was a cover for Outdoor Life magazine in 1949. And this is a scene in which the hounds have a mountain lion at bay in the tree. So this is a very popular. I looked at about 150 Kuhn paintings in Outdoor Life magazine. I would say this type of scene was easily one of the most popular in the history of that magazine. So that sporting painting, that storytelling. I wanted to emphasize a little bit this bronze, a really special piece. This is by John Quincy Adams Ward. Are there any, I can't remember if any of you are from New York City. Oh, so Central Park, you'll see the heroic version of this bronze in Central Park. There were some other casts done in later years, but this is one of the earliest American sculptures that associates the domestic dog with the American Indian. It's the human figure is almost Grecian or Roman in appearance, which would be typical of the influences on sculptors at the time. But it shows that companionship and relationship between people and the dog. And I think it's a pretty extraordinary piece from the Denver Art Museum.
Speaking of extraordinary pieces, how about these photographs? These are by Shelley Mossman, and she is an artist out of Minneapolis. And I kind of in my mind just think that she's been storing up these rich images that she has created. This is from a series she did about children and their pets. And she had a couple that had a Western theme to them, so we have borrowed those from her. But I think one of the things that is extraordinary about this work is that they're larger than life. That helps with that, a little bit of an edgy, you think children, dogs, and innocence, and how lovely that is. And she pushes that envelope just a little bit with making these images so big and that big, beautiful, great name. And if you notice, all of us have said, I'm not so sure these are kids' hands. So she does some manipulation to the photography that makes them edgy as well. And I like the fact that there are some parts of this that are kind of Annie Oakley stereotypical, but we've got a little girl with a huge dog and a little boy with a little dog, so she's kind of bending those stereotypes around a little bit. And this photograph it just speaks to that tradition of photography of children and dogs. And she really captures more of a historic feel, I think, with the kids being so serious in the images as well.
So that's definitely a boy?
Yes.
I thought it was a girl. I know, I thought it was a boy.
I don't know. I think it's a boy. But
Maybe it could be a girl.
could be.
Yeah.
But the other thing that is interesting is look at the way she's emphasized. She manipulates these photographs. She's emphasized that chin line. It almost looks like that's flat coming up off the.
But those children look more like adults. Their expressions are so different than anything you'd see in children's movies.
Right. She really is capturing something very unique. Okay.
Well, you'll kind of notice too, we have a lot of Davidia look Inuit prints here. So again, kind of illustrating just lots of different scenes of dogs and kind of community life and everyday life. Then over here, in kind of the companions piece, we have a piece from Magoo Luhan. And Magoo Luhan was one of the early Chicano artists. He founded, what was it called, Los Four? Is that what they were called? Yeah, Los Four. So it was a Chicano artist collective in California. And one of the things one of his main subjects that he always drew were dogs. So he had dogs driving lowriders, and so they're companions, but also kind of heroes at the same time. So this is one of very kind of iconic images of him kind of with his buddy that's a dog that's about the same size as a human.
And it looks like his head is bigger.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that it's a human hand rather than.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of the anthropomorphizing we do of dogs too, you know? Yeah, that's a good point.
I think this is a really lovely piece by Alan Hauser, so you're all probably familiar with his love of the female form and his very sensitive portrayal. A lot of the time when I look at his work, like the piece that's outside, you'll notice that the figures are making sound. But this is a particularly quiet piece, a quiet walk, and they're on their way to grandmother's house with a lovely, just very relaxed pup following along. And you might also remember this particular piece from one of the Idle Fellows, Anna Solaricus. Unfortunately, Maximus is no longer with us. But he was not wrapped in tape. There was gauze underneath. No one's worried about her. Everyone's worried about the dog. The dog, no dogs were harmed in this photo. And then this is a collaborative piece that's never been on display by Rick Bartow and Corky Claremont. So that's an especially special piece. They donated it to the museum.
Interesting that they two collaborated.
Yeah, they're all buds.
I like how you mix the modern with the older. It's a good mix.
Quite a contrast.
How did you plan on, how did you figure out how to do that? Did you do it by color or theme or?
Yeah, it's more of kind of. Well, I think, you know, the themes, the themes span geography and time, you know, that I think dogs have always been heroes and workers and companions for humans, so.
And the point of these exhibitions, the ones that are using a familiar theme to encourage maybe someone who wouldn't normally come to the Eidelsjorg, those exhibitions really want to highlight all three aspects of the collection. So in that regard, it is really great to have things in proximity for comparison and contrast. And I think that it helps to define parts of the collection when you can make those contrasts.
Well, yeah, and I think it's good to give people the idea that this was not done in the past. There's so much contemporary.
Yes.
And that's what people have so many stereotypes in their mind. They don't realize the active things that are going on.
Righto.
I love it.
How right you are.
I love it.
I'd like to mention just three pieces in this area real quickly. When we talk about this bronze by an artist named Frotton, Edward James Frotton was in one of our Quest shows early on. I saw Gail. Is Gail here?
Right across from you.
Say thank you to Gail and Carl. We have this piece because of their generosity. But I'd ask you maybe to imagine 1804, Lewis and Clark are headed west and they cross the White River just a little bit north of here. We don't know exactly where, but it's within Indianapolis. And with the Corps were a lot of other people besides Lewis and Clark. We always think about them, but William Clark had his African slave York, who is also in the piece. And in 1803, as the expedition was being formed in Philadelphia, Meriwether Lewis purchased the Newfoundland you see here named Seaman, and he stayed with the expedition all the way. So try to imagine him swimming across the White River and being a part of both companionship and the experience for everyone else in the expedition. I think Frotton has captured the personalities here really well. I want to mention the Bob Kuhn painting over here. He's the one who did the cover for Outdoor Life that I pointed out. Kuhn became a left illustration in about 1970. This is a typical painting he did in the early 90s, which shows, again, a mountain lion and the hunting dogs, but it's a much more aesthetic work. It's not meant to be an illustration. So the way in which he has drawn and composed this scene, drawing it, you can sort of imagine that composition that Jennifer was talking about with the grizzly at bay. This is still that sort of composition, this drawing eye right up the canvas. So a terrific painting from the National Wildlife Museum. And then one of my simplest favorite things here, I had to call the Texas Rangers, assuming they had dogs. Texas Rangers don't have dogs, but the Texas Highway Patrol does. And so Ulbrich and his human, Sergeant next to him here, Ulbrich had an extra badge. Ulbrich is a narcotics dog, works every day in the state of Texas, and this is another, we don't get deeply into law enforcement, but police dogs. The story of police dogs in the West is basically a 20th and 21st century story. Rescue dogs of all kinds are a part of that story, and it's one we could probably do a whole exhibit on if we were inclined. So I want to say thanks to Ulbrich for sharing his extra badge.
I do want to point out Bobby the Wonder Dog. Well, Togo and Balto are an interesting story. Togo and Balto were part of the Serum Run. Balto gained all the fame. However, Togo ran about 3/4 of that race, and Balto just took the last quarter, so he kind of stole the glory. But they were both owned by the same gentleman, so they do both go down in a kind of infamy. And one of my favorite stories is Bobby the Wonder Dog. Bobby the Wonder Dog lived in Oregon, traveled with his family to Indiana, got lost, got separated from his family, and they looked for him, but couldn't find him, went back home, and several months later, he had crossed the country to find them.
Wow.
So he's our Indiana Western dog connection.
There's a sculpture of Balto in Central Park.
Yes, yes.
My all-time favorite.
And these are, these 4 large drawings are by Michael Krauser, the photographer that I pointed out to you earlier. Incredibly beautiful photos from a book that he did called Dog Run. He did these images without people. This is all about dogs and how they interact with each other. And he did receive some criticism about these photographs, because we all like to think of our dogs as cuddly and soft, and we don't really take into consideration their own language between each other, which often involves teeth, but not in a negative way. That's just part of it. So he did receive some criticism for these photographs, but technically incredible and very inspiring photographs. And also a new acquisition, the Roy DeForest piece is a piece from Arnold Yales, if you all remember him. Roy DeForest is a very well-known painter from California. He's passed, and there's a big retrospective being created about his work right now. This is called Hunting for the Vicious Huntsman. And you can see that the dog has ripped the huntsman's heart out. But we still love the dogs. And then I will point out that the 2 watercolors to the left of the poem are by Ted Waddell, who is an artist in our collection, somebody that we did a solo exhibition 4 years ago. And that is actually part of a children's book that he and his wife have created, and Alyssa has put some of those books outside in the dog area by the doghouse for the kids to read. So take a look at those, they're quite sweet.
And I would like to suggest that, I don't know if you talk about this in your tours, but just something for you to think about. I think opposite corners of the gallery, it's fun to contrast the grizzly at bay with In Search of the Vicious Huntsman.
Correct.
And so the subject of the hunt is kind of fun to play with between the 2.
Yeah.
And then there's some Pueblo pottery here. So we have a cochiti figure, which again is sort of that anthropomorphizing of dogs. So it kind of is like a dog with like a human face, and it even has a crucifix hanging around its neck. So maybe it's like a priest dog. I'm not sure. So this one's on loan from National Museum of American Indian, and it really kind of cochiti figures like this are very humorous, and so there's the humor that we see in dogs too. And then this is a special piece that Jody Naranjo made specifically for this exhibit. It's called Pueblo Girl Loves Her Dogs, and she has Yorkies, and she absolutely adores those dogs. And she's always worried about them when, I'll see her at Santa Fe Indian Market, and she's always worried about who's watching her dogs, and so you can really see that just how important those dogs are to her, and how they inspire her. And I think that's one of the other things, thinking about how dogs inspire artists, how they inspire us as human beings. And so I think that goes into some of the other things that we have for drawing to, draw what, your animal or your favorite dog and how they inspire us. So.
And then just 2 things, don't forget that we do have an interactive kiosk. And we did a photo shoot to get a lot of the pictures of the dogs. So literally, with the few names that I made up, those are really the dogs that I introduced the dogs. So it'll say, "Hi, I'm Doc," blah blah, and it'll tell a little bit about the breed. and a few of the characteristics, and places that you can go to investigate a little further. The other thing that would be very helpful if you would help us help our audiences understand that this exhibition is to inspire and educate people about things that they can do with their dogs, but it is not for dogs. So we will have dogs for people to pet. We'll have pause and think dogs here on important programming weekends, and maybe even more weekends than that, depending on how they schedule. And we're going to have dogs demonstrating things, but the time to bring your dogs is really the Wednesday night concert under the sails. That's an awesome time to bring your dogs. Other than that, you're learning about beautiful dogs, what to do with dogs, how to think about dogs, some new things about dogs, dog.
Are the dogs in the video your dogs? Your personal dogs?
Some of those are my dogs.
And will you tell us? You would tell us?
Oh yes, I've been on TV with my dog all morning. I certainly am telling everyone. That's how many dogs you have? 5.
Thank you to Scott and James and Jennifer for taking us through the exhibition. I think you're more than welcome if you'd like to wander for a few minutes. We've also got, remember, the snacks and everything downstairs. And again, as a reminder, James is going to talk in more detail about some of the sporting paintings that you saw, and that'll be at noon for Curator's Choice. So that'll be meeting right back up here outside the exhibit. Thank you.